Okay, good day guys. We're going to be looking at Robert Frost's Mending Wall. He's an American poet, one of my favorites, and this poem is one of my favorite poems. Gents, the first thing I want you to do is read the poem Mending Wall by Robert Frost. You have a copy of it with you. Please do so. I'm not going to read it to you. I'll start the discussion with lines 1 to 5. So why don't you push pause, read the poem, and once you've read the poem, you can go on with this lesson. Well, let's start looking at lines 1 to 4. This poem is filled with mystery. It's talking about a wall between neighbors that has fallen down. And we start off by the speaker telling us that there is something that has made it happen. Now, he talks about this wall-breaking process as being perpetrated by someone that doesn't love a wall or something. And he has a couple of ideas of what it could be. He says the wall could fall over because of frozen groundswell. Now, when the ground freezes, it swells underneath the wall and pushes the wall up, and therefore the wall will fall down. And then these boulders on the top spill over, they fall off. And the gaps that are made between the walls are so big that two people can walk side by side through those. When we move on to lines 5 to 9, we realize that he also talks about the work of these hunters. So they are always bashing his wall down, he says, and he has to come after them over and over again and repair these walls of his. Now, the hunters would blame the rabbit, first of all, that goes into the wall to hide. And secondly, they would also blame the dogs, because the dogs are barking so much because they want the rabbit to come out. So, there we have it. In these first 5 lines, we have a farmer who finds a wall broken down in his land, and he's coming by at springtime to fix it, and he's wondering about which things have caused this. He says there's something strange that causes it to happen, and he also considers the fact that it might be hunters. In lines 10 to 11, the mystery is really enhanced here. He says no one has seen them made or even heard them made, but at spring mending time we find them there. So it doesn't matter that no one has seen or heard them made. The fact is that they find them there every year, these holes, these broken down walls. In lines 12 to 15, we get a real picture of what actually happens here when he lets his neighbor know that there's a hole in the wall. They check their calendars, they meet together, and they walk down the wall. And as they walk down the wall, they fix the wall. They set the wall between us once again. They put it up again. And as they walk, the wall is also still between them. I want you to notice the irony of this wall being between us. And the irony is that even though the wall separates his speaker from his neighbor, which is what they essentially wanted to do, it lets them come together once a year. So it's separating them, but it also brings them together. I also want you to notice that the wall is a metaphor. It's a metaphor for the division that is actually between the speaker and his neighbor. In lines 16 to 19, there's some lovely imagery. And he's talking about how the rocks, the boulders that have fallen on each side are put back onto the wall. And he says some are loaves, so there's a comparison there, a metaphor between the bricks or the rocks and loaves of bread, and some so nearly balls, so some are round. And you can think the ones that look like loaves are kind of like bricks, they'll stack easily, but the ones that look like balls are difficult to stack. And that he says they use a spell to make them balance. Stay where you are until our backs are turned. It's kind of like when you're sitting at the red traffic lights and you're in a hurry and you really want it to be green. You keep saying, please turn green, please turn green, please turn green. It's the same kind of spell. He'll put one of those round rocks, one of those boulders that nearly looks like a ball that could easily roll off. He would put it on there and say, stay where you are until our backs are turned. Just stay where you are, stay where you are. The funny thing really to notice at this point is that the neighbor and the speaker are actually building a wall that will inevitably fall down again. All they want is, while they are there, for the wall to stay in place, and that is why he says, until our backs are turned. It's interesting in lines 20 and 22 to recognize another metaphor that comes up here. He calls the building of this world just another kind of outdoor game, almost like they're on either side of a net, and it is little more than that. We see the reason he calls it a game in the next lines, in lines 23 to 26. They don't really need a wall, do they? Because the one guy has pine trees and the other guy has apple orchards, and he's quite funny. He says that it's not like my apple trees are going to walk across and eat the cones under his pines. And that's what he says. So he's actually making a bit of a mischievous joke in these lines, but he's saying, come on, dude, there's no way that my apples are going to eat your pines. It's quite cool to notice here when he says my apple trees will never get across. He's actually briefly personifying the apple trees. He's giving them human qualities, the quality to step over the wall and eat a pine tree. In response to the question, why do we need this wall? My apples aren't going to eat your pine cones. The neighbor says good fences make good neighbors. Now, it's important to realize that this is a cliche. Now, remember, a cliche is an overused expression. Something like, if your girlfriend dumps you, someone will say to you, well, there are a lot of fish in the sea, to try and make you feel better. But it doesn't make you feel better. It actually just makes you feel worse. And this is the same thing. Good fences make good neighbors is an overused expression, used all the time, and it kind of loses its meaning. And if you think about it, is it really true? The speaker here says he wants to be mischievous and challenge this idea that good fences make good neighbors with his neighbor. You could interpret this, the reason why the neighbor is saying this is actually he just likes his space. He likes to be private. He doesn't like to hang out with other people. There's quite a lot here in the next section, so you need to sort of kind of bear with me and keep with me. He carries on making this argument. He really wants to know why walls make good neighbors. And he says he understands the argument if there were cows, because if there were cows and those cows got across and they ate stuff or they damaged stuff, then he understands that. But he says there are no cows here. And he becomes a little judgmental here in these lines. He says, if I was building a wall, before I built the wall, I'd ask to know what I was walling in or walling out, or to whom I was likely to give offense. And so we see in his attitude here that he doesn't actually want the wall when his neighbor does. And chances are is his neighbor probably built the wall. Again, he says here that there's something that doesn't love a wall. And he brings in the whole thing of elves. He says, I could say elves to him, and he has it in inverted commas because it is just a ridiculous notion to say that elves are breaking the wall down. As we read further, we actually see in lines 38 to 41 that the speaker wants the neighbor to come up with his own ridiculous reason for having a wall because he sees no point in the wall. And then he looks at him, and his neighbor is bringing a stone grasped firmly by the top in each hand like an old Stone Age savage armed. And so he's saying that his neighbor is actually cavemanish or primitive. And he's making the point that these walls that they're building are actually a holdover from more primitive times. He really wants his neighbor to get with the program, doesn't he? What we also need to notice is that this is a particular figure of speech, and if you've picked it up because of that word like, a simile has been used to create that comparison. Clearly we get the picture that our speaker doesn't want this wall, but the neighbor does. And if you look at the next number of lines, it becomes very, very clear that there is something eerie about this neighbor. It says, in fact, that he moves in darkness, and it seems to be not of woods, only in the shade of trees. So there's something strange and sinister, possibly, about this neighbor too. And here, in the last 3 lines, we get to the crux of this poem. We realize here that the neighbor hasn't come up with this saying himself, but that it's actually his father's saying. And he likes the idea that maybe he thought of it, and he says again, good fences make good neighbors. And when the speaker tells us this again, good fences make good neighbors, and the fact that it's his father's saying, we get this idea that this neighbor is a man of tradition and rules, and actually the speaker is saying that rules need to be broken. So there we have it, guys. In fact, a poem about a farmer and his neighbor and a wall that keeps falling down. Has a bit of a deeper meaning, doesn't it? It talks about the walls we build between each other and why we need those walls. What are we keeping from each other? Should we rather be the kind of people who don't have walls, who don't build up metaphoric walls between us? There are lots of things that come out of this poem. I hope you've got some insight into it, and now it's time to do the worksheet tomorrow in class that your teacher will give you. Thank you.